Hello and welcome to Reimagining Love. I'm Dr. Alexandra Solomon. Relationships have the power to wound us and the power to heal us. As a clinical psychologist, author, and professor at Northwestern University, I've devoted my life to studying intimate partnerships and family dynamics. On Reimagining Love, I'm here to translate complex clinical topics into tools and takeaways that you can use in your relationships today. If you're ready to develop relational self-awareness and create vibrant and loving relationships with the people who matter most to you, you've come to the right place. I'm so glad that you're here. Hey there. Welcome back to Reimagining Love. Today's episode is called I Need More Connection, My Partner Needs More Space, Now What? Here's the deal. Dr. John Gottman found in his research that couples have two kinds of problems, solvable problems and perpetual problems. Solvable problems tend to be situational and specific, making agreements about how to handle housework, for example, even though housework conflict is like the bane of lots of couples' existence, solutions are available. Whereas perpetual problems are about temperamental or cultural or values differences or preferences. Problems that are perpetual problems elude solutions because they reflect things that are just more essential to each partner. So Gottman's research found that a full 69% of the conflicts that couples deal with fall into the perpetual problem bucket. So if we want to create thriving partnerships, we have got to learn how to live with that which cannot be fixed, with that which cannot be negotiated away. And there are a few central tensions that every couple has got to figure out how to carry. These are tensions that are not reconcilable, they're not solvable, they are to be carried. Ideally, with ever more grace, curiosity, compassion, and maybe even like levity. It's this constant dance that you're in with your partner. And today's deep dive solo episode is going to be us examining one of those key central tensions, togetherness versus separateness. How much time do we spend together as a couple? How much time do we spend apart? How much are we a we versus how much are we two me's? And by the way, the word tension has two definitions, like two dictionary definitions. Number one is the state of being stretched tight. And the number two definition of tension is mental or emotional strain. In this episode, I'm really using that first definition of tension. Like in physics, tension is the pulling forces, for example, on two ends of a rope. What I'm going to be inviting us into over and over again in this episode is this idea of tension being, in a case like this, descriptive, neutral, dare I say, scientific. It's that first definition that reminds us that tension is neither inherently bad nor inherently good. It just is. And obviously, figuring out how to navigate the me and the we in a romantic relationship is not easy, and it can create feelings of discomfort and anxiety, like that second definition of tension. But that's what this episode is here for, to normalize and validate what is a very real, neutral, scientific tension, and to give you tools to bridge the differences between you and your partner. When we're talking about these central tensions, like separateness and togetherness, what I think is really interesting is that they tend to manifest in different realms of a couple's relationship. So here are a few of the places where this tension between separateness and togetherness shows up for couples. This tension plays out emotionally, like how much emotional responsibility do we have to each other? How responsible are we for providing soothing and comfort to each other versus ourselves? The tension plays out financially around whether and how we combine our finances versus keeping our accounts separate. The tension plays out sexually. How much sexual obligation versus freedom do we have? Do we have an open sexual boundary? Are we monogamous? Is there space for masturbation? Or do each of us spend all of our sexual energy devoted exclusively to being with each other? This tension also plays out in a very pragmatic way, a moment to moment way that's about negotiating how you spend time. There are 24 hours in every day. How much of that time is devoted to togetherness versus each of us pursuing our own goals, our own hobbies, alone time, perhaps other relationships? So how do we build our days and our weeks and our months and our years as a couple? In that last realm, the pragmatics of time really is the focus of our episode today, because I think it's easy to miss, because I think it can feel silly or petty or too little to warrant our attention. Things like, are we watching a show together, or are we each watching our shows in separate rooms? Are we coordinating when we go to the gym? But as the author Annie Dillard says, quote, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives, end quote. And how we make these smaller, time-based decisions can amplify tensions that we feel in other realms of our relationship, like the sexual realm, like the emotional realm, like the financial realm. Okay, nerd alert, flashing nerd alert. In the world of family therapy, that's what we call isomorphism, variations of a theme that play out in different parts of the system. So a fight the two of you have around whether you're watching TV together or apart reminds you and amplifies the emotional tension that you feel, or the sexual tension that you feel. So these themes take on different forms in different parts of the relationship. That's isomorphism. And that's why it matters that we talk about it today. And this big picture question of me versus we ties to the central thesis of Esther Perel's fantastic book, Mating in Captivity. Here's a quote from her. Quote, love rests on two pillars, surrender and autonomy. Our need for togetherness exists alongside our need for separateness. One does not exist without the other, end quote. All relationships need to make space for these two pillars. One does not exist without the other. From what I've seen as a couples therapist and from my own experiences, I have a hunch that your orientation around these two pillars became really freaking clear for you during the pandemic. We were all thrust into these extremes of space versus togetherness more than ever. Even if you weren't living with your intimate partner at that time, you most likely learned something about your needs around space versus togetherness in terms of how it showed up in your relationship with your family or with your roommates. If you lived alone, how did you react to all that space? What did you learn about yourself? Personal anecdote. When we were in the pandemic, when my family was in the pandemic, I switched from face-to-face therapy with my own dear therapist to doing phone sessions with my very dear therapist. And I would go for walks and I would talk to her, and I really loved it. And I remember in one of our therapy sessions, I was sharing how I was having a hard time with all of the round-the-clock togetherness with Todd and with our kids. Like, I was spending too much time on the bathroom floor with the door closed and maybe a little too much time in my car, like just needing space. And Todd, meanwhile, seemed totally fine. And it was making me worry. Like I was adding a layer of meaning to my experience of wanting more space. I was thinking things like, what the heck does this mean for the future of our marriage? And how are we going to navigate retirement if it's this hard for us to spend time together? So I was lamenting about all of this to my therapist. And she opened up to me and shared that in her relationship, there was a theme that was not too dissimilar. She had started working from home. Her husband was moving into retirement. And she felt like if her husband had his way, they would sit together and have breakfast, and maybe they would go and do their thing for a little while, but they would come back together for lunch and then, maybe spend some more time together and then come back together for dinner. And she told him, like, I can't do it. I cannot do 3 meals a day with you. I'll have dinner with you, but I have to be able to be on my own schedule for a big part of the day. And I was so glad she shared that. It felt so validating to me that she could be both happily married and craving alone time. And she was modeling for me that her need for space was not commentary on her feelings about her husband. Her need for space was just her truth. Her need for space was descriptive. It wasn't rejecting. So in every partnership, there's going to be some level of difference in how each of you navigates togetherness and separateness. What do you do if you're the partner who's craving more space? How do you, with relational self-awareness, honor your need for alone time while honoring your partner's need for closeness and connection? If you're the partner who wants more connection, what gets kicked up inside of you when your partner tries to get that space? How can you ask them for what you need in a way that also honors their need to have some time away from you? So today, I'm going to speak to both partners, the partner who needs more space and the partner who desires more togetherness. And because we're doing what we always do around here, which is putting a really thick, really rich relational framework on this whole topic, I'm going to be referring to the person who wants more space as the space wanter, and I'll be referring to the person who wants more togetherness as the connection wanter. Now, I'm doing that for ease of language, but of course, you are more than your tendency towards wanting space or towards wanting connection. And it's worth saying, sometimes you might be the space wanter and sometimes you might be the connection wanter. But it tends to be the case that people tend to lean more in one direction. But it may be that in one chapter, you play one role and in one chapter, you play another role. These aren't fixed entities. These are tendencies. The point of today is for us to more deeply understand this central tension and to examine the feelings that may come up in each person, the meaning you make of what you want, the meaning you make of what your partner wants. And then I'll share some principles for how you can have conversations that honor the complexity and the tenderness that's embedded here, and that helps you make relational agreements that maximize connection and that minimize resentment. And as we often do, my team and I have created an extra resource for you for your journey. So we've got a companion worksheet for the episode that's going to guide you through some of the strategies that we're talking about today. If you're a newsletter subscriber already, you are going to be able to access that worksheet in the next few weeks' newsletters. If you're not part of our weekly newsletter community, head to dralexandrasolomon.com/space. And you can get the worksheet there. That link is also in the show notes. Okay, caveats. We always do caveats. Number one, I'm talking about the need for space within the context of a committed relationship. So today, I'm not talking about the need for space in order to figure out whether or not you want to stay together or break up. That's like the need for space with the volume turned all the way up. If that topic is of interest to you, I need space, meaning I need to figure out what the heck I want from this relationship, then I can for sure create an episode on that topic down the road. I have many thoughts, as you might imagine. So shoot me an email or a DM, slide into my DMs and let me know. Number two, as you listen, I want to invite you to remember that you can kind of like lengthen or shorten the time frame that we're talking about here. You can use the ideas to build a day, to build a week, or to build a month with your partner. So it's not, the time frame doesn't matter. We're just kind of talking about how you negotiate together and apart. But it might be sometimes that you use these ideas around afternoon plans, and sometimes it might be that you use these ideas to talk about, long distance periods of your relationship. So regardless of the time interval, these principles all apply. Number three, this topic for sure intersects with something that couples therapists refer to as the pursuer-distancer cycle, which is the more one person pursues for connection and conversation and engagement, the more the other person pulls away and shuts down. So that idea of a pursuer-distancer cycle certainly overlaps with today's episode, but here's the difference. When we're talking about the pursuer-distancer cycle, we're usually talking about it in the context of conflict. And what I'm talking about today is more broad than that. It really is just about how the two of you navigate literally being together and literally being apart. Number four, This topic also intersects with the realm of attachment styles. For those of you who really turn to an attachment frame, within the label of the space wanter, you're going to hear that that person sounds like someone who is avoidantly attached. And within the label of the connection wanter, that person's going to sound to you like someone who's more anxiously attached. So fine, but note that what I really am trying to do in this episode is create a little more breathing room around these ideas. I just want us to be careful to not slip into diagnosis, pathology, pathologizing ourselves, pathologizing our partner. And that's why I'm presenting everything today as a relational dilemma. Certainly one that is tender, but it's workable. I'm not presenting this as an individual personality trait framework. This is not about who we are at our core. I certainly would never, ever, ever deny an attachment lens. I just want to invite us to be a little more flexible and a little more light. If we were to approach this topic with purely an attachment lens, I worry about us running into the risk of scaring ourselves or feeling like we're urgent to fix ourselves or to fix our partner, versus learning to live with something that is a fundamental challenge that every couple navigates. So let's just see if we can settle in to a place somewhere between flippant and dire. There are real feelings here, and there are real relational consequences when couples need different things. But I just don't want us to panic about the difference in our needs, because every couple has to figure this out. So we're talking about the need for solitude within an intimate relationship. And I think we have to take a moment and honor this distinction between being alone and feeling lonely. Being alone, having solitude, feels like a choice. It's a reset. It's an opportunity to kind of find some spaciousness within and around us. Whereas loneliness is imposed. It's not chosen. It's an ache. It's a kind of craving for a connection that you don't have or you can't have. So there's a place for solitude within an intimate relationship. But what often plays out is that the space wanter is craving solitude, which makes the connection wanter feel lonely. So you can see how this issue becomes cyclical. One person wants solitude, but if the other person doesn't, that space now feels imposed upon them. And then the connection wanter feels lonely and maybe responds with cries for connection, which then comes off to the space wanter as neediness, which makes them in turn crave more space. And the cycle continues. We're going to further add more context to that cycle, and I'll offer some suggestions for how to navigate it. But right off the bat, let me offer something to each partner regarding alone versus lonely. For the connection wanter, I want you to get curious about what earlier experiences you had with loneliness. Like, get in touch with times or memories of loneliness for you. What was that like? And how is this dynamic with your partner different? And how might you stretch yourself to see if you might be able to feel proud of giving your partner something that they need in order to be a good partner to you and a good partner for you? Like, your willingness to grant your partner space for solitude helps them be the partner that you need and the partner that you want them to be. So versus your past experiences of loneliness, can this pang of loneliness that you feel now when your partner takes space, can it be reframed as, I miss my partner, but I'm also proud of myself for giving them what they need to regulate, to reset, and to feel good about stepping back into connection with me. So for the space wanter, if and when you do step away, I really want to challenge you to make sure that you savor that time. Be intentional with that time. Remember that the function of stepping away is so that you can step back in to your relationship with more energy for connection. So just make sure that your solitude is effective. productive solitude, if you will. I want to invite you to get really specific about what actually fills up your tank when you are away from your partner, so that you're not, spending hours scrolling social media and then realizing at the end that you didn't really get the reset that you needed. Be super intentional about it, because your absence is felt. Like that's not a guilt trip. That's actually kind of cool. Like, how cool that your absence is felt. That's an honor. So not a guilt trip. It's just a reminder that you matter. And because you have chosen intimate partnership, you've chosen to participate in a relational ecosystem, right? The choices that you make have an impact on your partner. Okay, I want us to zoom out for a moment and put two cultural lenses on this topic. We're going to add a little bit of context to this tension so that we can better understand that larger cultural backdrop against which you and your partner are having these conversations. You know that I love to put us in that larger context. We've all been socialized. We all were good listeners, and this topic hits us differently based on our cultural socialization. So these two lenses are, number one, eroticized enmeshment, and number two, gender. The first lens I want us to touch on is this romanticized myth that eroticizes enmeshment. What a fancy way of saying it. Romantic mythology teaches us this idea that if it's true love, the only thing that we should want is togetherness. We saw that when Tom Cruise famously told Renee Zellweger, "You complete me," and Jerry Maguire, right? Like they were merged. She completed him. We see that in the way that our culture elevates simultaneous orgasms as the peak sexual experience, right? The complete merger, the total togetherness of not just bodies, but orgasms. We see it in the matching couples pajamas that are marketed year after year during the holidays. We eroticize enmeshment. We eroticize two becoming one, union. And eroticized enmeshment teaches us that the marker of a strong relationship is the desire for togetherness. So therefore, by extension, a partner who needs space must therefore not love their partner very much. So if we equate togetherness with true love, then the flip must also be true within that mythology, which is that space equals they're just not that into you. Romantic mythology would tell us there's only one possible explanation for needing space. That's why our partner's need for space can feel so darn personal. It feels like a rejection of us. That's why our need for space can feel like a diagnostic indicator. I need space. I must not be that into my partner. I think a perfect example of this is the idea of sleep divorce. It's why rather than just saying some couples sleep apart, the culture has coined this term, sleep divorce, because it feels so significant. It feels so dire. It feels so severe. I did, by the way, a whole episode on sleep divorces. And that link is in the show notes for you if you want to engage a little more deeply with that idea. Okay, number two, gender. There's a way in which this idea of eroticized enmeshment, there's something gendered about it. Women are especially taught to want closeness in our culture. There's a patriarchal, heteronormative stereotype that women are the connection wanters and men are the space wanters. I will say, in my clinical experiences, and frankly, my own experience, tend to subvert the narrative, or at least add complexity to the narrative, that women are the ones who typically want more closeness. As I said before, I tend to be the one who wants a bit more space in my marriage, and I've heard that a number of times from women and from cis hetero couples. Regardless of the reason, whether it's family of origin wounds or attachment orientation or nervous system settings or temperament or personality or work demands or whatever, if your bodies map onto that stereotype of she wants more closeness and he wants more separateness, then there is a set of feelings about what it's like to play out that trope. The cultural stereotype is playing out right there in your own family room. By contrast, if your bodies don't map on to the stereotype, if she wants more space and he wants more connection, there's also a set of feelings that come up when you feel like you are rejecting the norm or not following the norm. Even if you're fully aware that this is a stereotype, your positioning in regard to that stereotype might evoke some measure of self-criticism or some measure of concern. So I know for me, there have been times where I've caught myself wondering things like, am I not a good wife? Or what's wrong with me that I don't want more time with my husband? Or I think for men who are the connection wanters, there might be some shame or some measure of embarrassment about the fact that they tend to be the connection wanter and their wife is more the space wanter. Like they might feel like, what's wrong with me? That I'm in love with this woman who doesn't want to be with me as much as I want to be with her. So whenever we stand outside of a dominant gender narrative, feelings of shame or worry about not being quote unquote normal may come up. Even if we fully 100% rationally know that these stereotypes are at worst harmful and at best not particularly helpful or relevant. And I have a hunch that the system of patriarchy is invested in this idea that women are naturally and inherently, and perhaps even biologically, the connection wanters because that idea supports the status quo. The stereotype or the belief lets us keep training women to think that they should want closeness. And women who are a little bit more meh about closeness threaten patriarchy and threaten the sort of traditional social order, which is predicated on women devoting the bulk of their energy to relationships and to marriage and to family and to home. And by the by, it may very well be that women who are space wanters are space wanters precisely because of the emotional and energetic demands that are placed on women under a patriarchal system. In a relationship that follows even some of the traditional trends around domestic labor and mental load, for a man, closeness just equals closeness, right? So for a man, it might just be like, why wouldn't you want to be close to me? Closeness is pleasurable. Where for a woman, closeness means labor. Now I'm thinking about what's for dinner, and I know I'm going to be the one who's responsible for it. Now we're spending time together. We're chatting about birthdays, anniversaries, upcoming things that are happening, and I know I'm largely going to be responsible for making those things happen. Now we're spending time together, and that might lead to my partner wanting sex and me feeling obliged and playing that thing out. And another kind of labor is under patriarchy. Closeness also means that women are likely doing something called hermeneutic labor, which you might have heard me talk about in another episode. It's like my new favorite nerdy term. It was coined by Ellie Anderson, who is a philosophy professor at Pomona College. Hermeneutic labor is the burdensome activity of, quote, understanding and coherently expressing one's own feelings, desires, intentions, and motivations, and discerning those of others and inventing solutions for relational issues that arise from interpersonal tensions. How fantastic is that? She argues that women in heterosexual relationships tend to shoulder the bulk of hermeneutic labor. So what this means then is if she's shouldering the brunt of hermeneutic labor, which Ellie Anderson would say she most likely is, then he's enjoying the conversation, right? The conversation is the conversation. Meanwhile, she is in the conversation, listening and talking. She's working to understand her own perspective. She's working to understand his perspective, and she's working to help him understand his perspective. So perhaps when we have a situation where a woman is the space wanter, what they are wanting space from is, in part, hermeneutic labor, domestic labor, gendered labor. Okay, so that's a little feminist critique there for you, feminist analysis, romantic mythology analysis. So let's now get into the anatomy of the separateness togetherness tension. As I often say on Reimagining Love, the problem is not the differences between us. The differences just happen. We come into intimate partnership with hundreds of differences between the two of us. The problem is what we do in the face of all of the thoughts and all of the feelings that get evoked inside of us and that play out in the space between us when we are face to face with these differences. And we can either fill that space between my way and your way with empathy or judgment, with curiosity or blame. Relational differences have the power to teach us something or to threaten connection, depending on our approach. Because the chances that two people are going to want the same amount of togetherness and separateness at all times is slim to none. But we have to tend to the feelings that we bump into in the moments when there's not total flow and ease around the difference. So how do these tensions show up? Well, first, they might show up in like the frequency of space. How many nights are we together versus how many nights are we apart, for example? And for those who are kind of early on in dating, this can be a real point of tension. One of you wants to spend every other night together. The other of you wants to be together most of the nights. And this frequency question doesn't go away. For Todd and I, it comes up, for example, decades into our marriage around how many nights a week I'm going to sit on the couch, work versus put my laptop away and go do something together with Todd in the evening. In part, this is dictated by my very real, legitimate, actual workflow, but it's also about me checking in about my priorities and the needs of our relationship because, like many of you, there's always something I could be doing for work. So the question may change when a couple's in a long-term relationship about how frequently we're together in the evening versus apart in the evening, but it doesn't ever go away. For people who are dating, this question around frequency of how often are we together, how often we are apart, it might feel like a real test for you. Like, well, how much do you actually like me? What is actually just a set point of where you fall on that separateness, togetherness scale ends up feeling like a sign of rejection. I think people may mistake, like, oh my gosh, she only wants to be with me every other night to mean, therefore, she's not that into me. But that might not be what's going on here. If she has a very different orientation around space, if she has a different set point than you have, for her, every other night might actually be precisely a sign of how incredibly into you she is, right? Like to her, a normal, quote unquote, normal amount of togetherness is once a week, but she likes you so much that she wants to be with you every other night. For her, she's at the upper limit of her togetherness. So for her, it's a lot, but in a very good way. So point being here, be careful not to extrapolate from the number, we're only together every other night, to taking that to be a metric of how much this person that you're dating likes you, because you have to calibrate that against what their set point is, right? For them, they might be spending a lot of time with you. They're just more of a space wanter. The best thing you can do is check in. The story I'm telling myself is that because I would love to spend more time with you, I must be more invested than you. And then under this scenario, hopefully she would say something to you that would indicate that she's actually very into you and that it's a lot for her to be with you every other night. So no matter what relationship level or what milestone you're at, the point here is to arrive at this issue with a desire for open conversation without assumption, without demand. And I want you to arrive at the conversation before the assumptions have taken over, before you have already cemented in your own mind a story about what this frequency means or doesn't mean. Because otherwise, if you come in with a story, you only want this much time with me, you do not like me as much as I like you, you're going to create the conditions for defensiveness, which is going to add unnecessary stress to what can actually be a pretty illuminating conversation. Okay, number 2, contact during space. Like when we're apart, how do we keep in touch? Do we call? Do we text? How often? So early in our relationship, the way this would play out is like, are we doing a good morning text every morning? But I will say this question of like frequency of contact when we're apart, it doesn't go away. So even for a married couple, when we're at work, are we sending each other memes back and forth? Are we doing a midday phone call? How about when you're traveling? When you're traveling for work, are we talking on the phone? These are, again, the pragmatics of togetherness and separateness that end up taking on feelings. I will tell you, I've spent a lot of time working with couples on how they navigate traveling separately. What is a reasonable expectation on how much we're staying in touch with each other when we're apart? And there can be so many feelings that come up with that question. The one who wants, a 45-minute check-in each day may feel shame as if they're being needy, or they may feel anger as if the other person isn't pulling their weight in the marriage because they don't want to prioritize having a nice, long conversation. So oftentimes what happens is that one partner declares, my needs are not being met in this relationship. That's a highly individualistic framing, as if the other person's needs don't matter or are somehow less legitimate. Instead, what we need to do is honor that there are natural and normative differences on this. Smart minds can differ. And if we start from that place of what I want is normal and what you want is normal, then we end up having an entirely different conversation, a more expansive conversation versus trying to figure out whose fault any of this is. Okay, how about timing of space? I want space now, but you want togetherness now. Whereas one person likes to have togetherness in the evening, the other person prefers to start their days together. One person wants weekends to spend time together. The other person wants to have more weeknights. That all has to get talked about, right? These are preferences. These are not proof of anything one way or the other. Number 4 would be phases of space. You used to need more space, and now I need more space. It might feel like these are set in stone traits because there is a tendency around who typically is the space wanter and who typically is the connection wanter. But if you look across the whole entirety of your relationship, there might be phases or chapters when one of you wants more space, one of you wants more connection. So that might reflect different stress levels or the kinds of support you have in your system at that time. So my point here is just to be curious about what are the contributing factors that make one of you lean this way and one of you lean this way. The last one, number 5, is space being wanted versus space being needed. For example, I need space after conflict. My partner needs closeness after conflict. I think sometimes interest in having space is pretty neutral. It's more like a preference. And sometimes interest in having space feels more like a need. For example, at the end of a long day or after a conflict. I see this a lot where one partner needs space after conflict and the other partner needs to connect after conflict. I will remind you again, this is a cycle, and how each of us behaves in the cycle has the power to change the cycle. My colleague Eli Finkel did research with people who meet the criteria for more of an avoidant attachment style. And what he found is that when people who are avoidant are given space, like their partner doesn't pursue them, their partner doesn't criticize them for the space they need, what happens is over time, those people tend to become less avoidant. So the more calm I can stay when you need space, the easier it is for you to dip out and then dip back in. And the more you dip out and then dip back in, the easier it is for me to stay calm the next time you need space. This is a dance. And when you can honor the legitimacy of both of your needs, and when you know that you can work together on this, the dance changes. The experiences that we create together have the power to shift our set points. I'm going to identify some feelings that come up around this. And when I do, I'll also be hypothesizing about the etiology or the root or the origin story about why you may tend to skew towards wanting space or wanting closeness. I'm going to talk to the space wanters first, then I'm going to talk to the connection wanters. And the goal here in this part is twofold. Number 1, I want to help you increase your self-awareness because I'll be talking part of the time about your experience. And number 2, I want to increase empathy because I'll be talking for part of the time about your partner's experience. So listen openly to both. Okay, space wanters, huddle up. And let's look at the feelings that might come up for you when your partner wants more closeness than you are available for. One feeling that might come up for space wanters is that their partner's need for connection makes them feel smothered. If I'm the space wanter, your need to be close to me can make me feel smothered at times. Okay. Rather than pointing my finger at you and labeling you as needy or demanding or smothering, can I be brave enough to hold up the mirror and just be curious about myself? When else in my life have I felt smothered? What does this experience remind me of? Perhaps I grew up in a family of origin where there was constant commentary and judgment on my every move. Okay, well, it makes sense then that your need for closeness is going to feel unsafe to me. Like the closer you are to me, the easier it's going to be for you to catch me doing something wrong. The easier it's going to be for you to critique me. Perhaps I grew up in a family of origin where my parents expected me to be available, to support them, or to tend to their emotions much more than I was equipped to do, much more than what was appropriate for me to do. Off the record, that was exactly me in my family. My mom was pretty darn emotionally dysregulated a lot of the time. And I felt so responsible for her feelings that still, I think in part, my tendency towards being a space wanter is there's still somewhat of a merger for me between closeness and responsibility. Like if you are close to me, I can start to feel responsible for you. I have to manage that blur for me between closeness and responsibility. So it can feel at times like the only way to keep myself safe from the feeling of being responsible for you is by taking space from you. So if that part lands, just again, turn curiously and gently towards your past here. Another feeling that may come up for a space wanter sounds like this. Your need for connection makes me worry that you're weak. And I here want to ask you to consider, whose story is that? What's the origin of that story? So I'm going to put this in terms of a clinical example, but it is not about any specific client of mine. It's merely an amalgam of my 25 years of clients. So let's say I have a male client who skews towards being a space wanter. And he confuses his wife's desire for closeness with judging her as weak. So she really is approaching him like, I love you and I want to be near you. But to him, this connects with his history of having a depressed mom who relied on him too much for happiness and for meaning. So when he was young, his mother's need for closeness made him feel unsafe and overwhelmed. And her need felt like a reflection of her weakness. And so therefore, he projects that onto his wife. And so when she's saying, let's watch a show together, he feels like she's saying, I'm weak. I cannot stand on my own 2 feet. Okay, so if that is landing for you, where at times you view your partner's need for closeness as a sign of weakness, just see if you can get curious. What is it about your story that leads you to confuse a desire for closeness with weakness? Okay, so step 1 is notice the experience that you have. I feel smothered, or the story that you make up about your partner. They are weak. Step 2, connect it to your past. How that old story created feelings of not being safe when you were little. Step 3, send a ton of compassion to little you for what you experienced. Step 4, come back to the present. That was then, this is now. Different relationship, new possibilities. Okay. Now let's turn to the connection wanter and look at the feelings that might be associated with the experience of your partner wanting space when you want closeness. The first feeling that might come up for you is your need for space makes me feel abandoned. It may be hard for you as a connection wanter to understand that you can be emotionally safe and even emotionally connected when you are apart. And this feeling may make a ton of sense given your history. So check in with yourself. When have you felt abandoned? Perhaps when you were little, you actually were abandoned. either through someone leaving physically or leaving you emotionally, so that you were left alone by yourself with big feelings and expected to handle that all alone. This is a time for you to slow down and notice and honor the little you who was too alone with too many feelings, and assure that version of you that this is not history repeating itself. The next feeling for the connection wanter may be, your need for space makes me feel like I'm settling for scraps. I feel like I'm abandoning myself. I feel like I'm tolerating something that is intolerable. Okay, here's the check-in. Whose story is that? Did you perhaps actually watch someone in your life tolerate abuse, tolerate addiction, tolerate infidelity, tolerate deceit? If so, when you tolerate that which is a normative difference between you and your partner, there's a part of you that starts to say, uh-oh, I am doing in my relationship the same thing I watched, whatever, my mom do. Okay, can you stretch yourself and remind yourself, no, you're not. You are managing something that every couple has to manage. The fact that you and your partner don't have the same set point around this is not, in and of itself, evidence of pathology or evidence of neglect or evidence that you are being taken advantage of. But if you actually did watch someone tolerate the intolerable, then it makes total sense that a part of you says, uh-oh, I am doing the same thing that they did. Also, it's worth saying really clearly that it is not my place to diagnose what's happening in your relationship or tell you what to do about the tensions in your relationship. It may be that the two of you have a difference that is way too big and there are way too many opportunities for misunderstanding, for hurt feelings. There's no way to bridge this impasse. It may require you to give up too much in terms of what you want for your lives. It may be. I just am inviting you to be careful about a story that takes what is a tolerable, manageable difference and, frankly, an opportunity for personal growth in terms of being able to take care of yourself and turns that into evidence that you are abandoning yourself. Finally, let's take a look at where to go from here. I'm going to offer the space wanter some internal strategies as well as some relational strategies. Then I'm going to offer the connection wanter some internal strategies and then some relational strategies. Because here's the thing, there is wisdom in what each of you is advocating for. You each are advocating for a fundamental need in the relationship. You just have done this thing that I call splitting the ambivalence. One of you is holding one part of the tension and one of you is holding the other part of the tension. You are a system, and the system has projected all of one thing onto one and all of the other thing onto the other. And by the way, it's really easy to hold one part of the tension, to hold one pole, when you can safely assume that the other guy is going to hold the other pole. I can step away and get space because I reasonably know that you're going to hold center and that you're going to be available when I get back. I can reasonably reach for you because I can trust that you're going to make sure that we don't merge completely, right? It's like each of you, it's easy to kind of play your part when you can assume that the other person's going to play their part. So you both are advocating for something that is reasonable, that is fundamental. And as you approach this with relational self-awareness, what you end up doing is turning this tension into an asset for your relationship. It is good for couples to have space. It is good for couples to have connection. So you've got all your bases covered as long as you can properly leverage your strengths. Okay, space wanter, you're up first. Internal resources, things you can do inside of you. Number one, practice self-compassion. Remind yourself that you are more than your desire for space. My need for space is not a reflection of my brokenness. If you can truly feel that, then when you are asking for space, you can ask from a platform of self-worth rather than from a place of shame or from a place of apology. Because when we ask for things from a place of apology, I think it has the effect of scaring our partner, right? Like, this must be really bad if you have to apologize as you ask me for it. So first step is self-compassion. You are normal. This is normal. The second internal thing I would suggest to you is to get clear that this is not an essential truth about yourself. Like, you are not a recluse. You are not a loner. You also want connection. So remind yourself that yes, space is something that you need, but it is not the only thing that you need. Think about moments where you have savored connection with your partner. This also helps you get out of some of the polarization that starts to happen. Number 3, remind yourself that your need for space is a benefit to the relationship. You are the watchdog in this relationship for the essential need that is yours and that is your partner's, that both of you need space. So you just end up being the one who's on the lookout for opportunities to take a little bit of breathing room. Number 4, keep doing your inner work. Yes, in part, you want space because it's a normal human desire. And in part, you want space because there likely was a time in your life where closeness was fraught. Closeness equaled criticism. Closeness equaled abuse. Closeness equaled volatility. So your survival strategy when you were in an unsafe or unhealthy environment was isolation or pulling away. That was adaptive. And thank goodness you were able to do that. But that was then, this is now. Your partner, thank goodness, hopefully, does not do to you what was done to you back then. So then the assurance that you need to offer to little you is, I can be close and safe. And you can say to little you, I've got you now. I can take care of this. I can handle this. All right, relational strategies for you, the space wanter. How to ask for space. I'm going to offer you 4 steps in how to ask for space in a relationally self-aware way. Number 1, front load stepping away with strong affirmations. I love you. I can't wait to get back together at the end of the day. Number 2, express gratitude. Thank you for honoring my need, even when it's not the easiest thing in the world for you. Number 3, show your partner empathy. You and I are a bit different in this way, and I know this can be hard for you. Number 4, talk in a warm and excited way about the connecting you're going to do later. I can't wait for dinner tonight. Make a plan and be enthusiastic about it. How to respond to your partner's bid for connection. Number 1, remind yourself that connection is not smothering and connection is not control. Number 2, remind yourself that giving your partner what they want does not equal sacrificing what you want. A healthy relational ecosystem is one in which everyone gets the thing they want some of the time. Number 3, there's a little space for gratitude here. When your partner asks for closeness, can you say something like, thank you for keeping an eye out for our need to make time together. Thank you for suggesting this activity for us. Number 4, make sure you take a moment to feel proud. Like, land for yourself that feeling of pride that you are a relational badass for turning toward your partner when they make a bid for connection and giving them what they want, which is also good for you. Number 5, titration. So the growing edge here for you, the space wanter, is figuring out how to have an increasing capacity for connection without tipping over into feeling smothered or feeling shut down. So it's like, how can you titrate it? Like, maybe you watch a movie with your partner, but you each get to have your own blankets. Maybe you hold hands during the movie, but you don't have your legs wrapped around each other for the whole time. So closeness doesn't equal merger. You get to have agency over titrating it, like how close you are when you are together. And it's not all or nothing. Okay, connection wanter, you're up. Let's talk about some internal strategies for you. Number 1 is self-compassion. Your desire for closeness is a reflection of health, not pathology. Number 2, your desire for closeness is good for your relationship. Like, it's a benefit to your relationship that you have your finger on the pulse of making sure that you have time as a couple. Your partner is lucky to have someone who wants to spend time with them the way that you do. What a wonderful gift you give to your partner. Number 3, your need for closeness is not the sum total of you. You also know how to be good on your own. Number 4, keep doing your inner work, caring for a little version of you. When you were young, connection was a need. And yes, in part, you skew the way that you do because maybe there's a family of origin wound where you did not feel chosen. You were not chosen. You were not cared for. You were not protected. So there's always going to be a little part of you that orients to connection because it feels like the only way you can create safety and belonging. But that was then. This is now. You can take care of that young you and that little you. And that little you is actually never alone because you have their back now. You are always going to be tending to that part of you. What's different now is that you get to have connection. You don't need connection, but you relish connection. You love connection. You get to have it. But it's not life or death the way that it was and the way that it felt like it was in childhood. Relational strategies for you, the connection wanter. How to ask for connection. The thing we don't want to do here is say something like, you should want to spend time together, or we've been apart all day. The least you could do is watch a show with me. We don't want to lead with what ends up landing like a guilt trip. So here's where I really think those internal strategies that I just offered can guide you. The internal work liberates you from the guilt trippy, passive aggressive invite. So instead, just make your invite. I have an idea. Let's watch a show together tonight. So that invite comes from a platform of warmth and desire rather than guilt and resentment. And that internal work primes you for the loving ask so that you are grounded in the truth that what you're asking for is good for your relationship. You have no apology to make. You have nothing to prove. You can just make the ask. You can even, bonus points, personalize the ask. I would love to go for a walk. I would love if we could go see this movie. Instead of making it about the conflict you guys have around this or what you think your partner should want or should do with you, just let your ask stand on its own. That way, when you do make your invite, it's just an invite. And make sure that you savor that. Make sure that you feel proud of your ability to just make an ask. You are a relational badass. Okay, finally, how to respond to your partner's need for space. Number 1, remind yourself that separateness is not rejection. As you deepen this practice, perhaps you can call up a memory of when giving your partner space allowed them to return to connection with more energy in their tank. So remind yourself of that successful loop of them stepping away, them coming back, them being recharged, and the two of you then being able to connect. Remind yourself that you're trying to create a different pattern here. And then number 2, in this time away from each other, it's really important for you to have something to do that's not just like, fine, I'll go to the gym. Don't make it feisty. Don't have it be a reaction to their need for space. What will you do to actually care for you? What hobbies do you get to pursue? Who might you get to reach out to? What plans do you get to make? How might you benefit from some solitude yourself? Separateness also does not mean you waiting around either, right? We don't want you to be waiting around because when you're waiting around, all you're going to be doing is getting insecure and resentful and angry and scared and full of shame. This time apart is an opportunity, not a punishment. Okay. Now, before we go, I have a small challenge for both of you, for both the space wanter and the connection wanter. Once a week, I want you to visit your partner's world. What do I mean by this? To the degree you can, if you're the space wanter, I want you to find one opportunity to initiate connection. If you're the connection wanter, I want you to find one opportunity to initiate separateness. When you do this, you're flipping the polarity. It's also an empathy builder because neither positionality here is particularly easy. It's not easy to be the one who constantly feels like they're pulling away from their partner in order to get the space they need. It's not easy to feel like you're the one following your partner around the house, asking for their attention. Neither of these positions is easy. So once a week, step into this empathy building exercise and initiate the opposite pull from your usual, normal mode. And then see what you gain or learn from stepping into that opposite position. Okay, we did it. Thank you for joining me here on Reimagining Love for this exploration of space and closeness. I love this topic because it's not something that we can fix. It's something we've got to be curious about with our partners. I think it's very exciting that we can look at this as a dance and that we can change the music. We can learn some new dance moves. And I hope this episode helped you brainstorm some new ways that you can handle this dynamic with your partner. And a reminder that I've made you a companion worksheet for this episode. So if you're a newsletter subscriber, look out for that worksheet in the next few weeks of newsletters. Otherwise, visit dralexandrasolomon.com/space to get access to it. If you enjoy the show, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a review on your favorite podcast platform or share the episode with a loved one. Okay, until next time, be well. Reimagining Love is produced and edited by Emily Reeves. Our theme music was composed by Slade Warnkin. Do you have a relationship question that you want answered on the show? Visit reimagininglove.com to send in a written or audio question. Questions can be about intimate partnerships, family relationships, friendships, you name it. If you're looking for more love and relationship content, you can find me on Instagram at dr.alexandra.solomon or visit my website, dralexandrasolomon.com, where you'll find my blog as well as the Intimate Relationships 101 e-course based off of the popular class I teach at Northwestern University. Thank you for listening and see you next week here on Reimagining Love.